is often heavy, with the scent of extreme luxury, expensive oud, jet fuel from private hangars, and the unspoken promise that for the right person, every door on earth is open. But in the early days of February, in the year 2026, that promise was shattered in a way that the global elite never saw coming. It did not start with a public scene or a flurry of paparazzi flashes. Instead, it began with a silence so profound, it froze the corridors of power from the Middle East to London. Imagine the scene at the private terminal of the world's busiest international hub. A luxury jet glides onto the tarmac under the white-hot desert sun. The passenger inside expects the usual choreography of high-status travel, a fleet of tinted black SUVs, a respectful nod from senior customs officials, and a seamless transition into the world of seven-star hotels and royal majlis. Instead, there was a void. There was no welcoming committee. There was no pre-cleared passage. Just a quiet, clinical directive from immigration officers whose faces remained as unreadable as the desert horizon. For the better part of a decade, one name has served as the ultimate lightning rod for global attention, a name that carried the ancient weight of the British monarchy and the modern polish of Hollywood fame: Meghan Markle. She arrived in the City of Gold expecting the warmth of her perceived status to melt any barrier. What she encountered instead was the coldest phenomenon in the world of high diplomacy: total, absolute, and calculated silence. This was the snub heard around the world, yet it made no sound at the time. Invitations to exclusive galas suddenly vanished from digital calendars. Private meetings with the region's most powerful brokers were rescheduled into oblivion. The doors of the palatial villas did not just close, they seemed to vanish entirely, as if the path to entry had never existed in the first place. What triggered this dramatic shift? Why did Dubai, a city that normally thrives on the oxygen of celebrity and the presence of high-profile icons, decide that this specific individual was no longer welcome within its carefully managed borders? Insiders claim the move was not a mistake. It was a deliberate, strategic, and deeply personal rebuke. It was the moment a playground for the elites delivered a stunning message that no one, least of all the subject herself, was prepared to hear. As rumors began to swirl and tempers allegedly flared behind the scenes, one question dominated the global conversation. What did she do to make Dubai say no? Was this a matter of local law, or was it a signal of a much larger, global recalculation of her worth? In the next 50 minutes, we are going to peel back the layers of a scandal that the mainstream media is terrified to touch. We will explore the secret communications between the Desert Kingdom and the British Crown, the frantic, failed calls for diplomatic intervention, and the moment the palace decided to draw a line in the sand that can never be crossed again. This is the story of the day the authority finally expired. This is the Dubai moment. The moment she stepped off the private aircraft, a sleek Gulfstream G650 shimmering under the oppressive heat of the desert sun, the air should have felt triumphant. In the mind of a woman who had spent years cultivating an image of global influence, Dubai was supposed to be the ultimate validation. This was a city built on the very things she had sought to master: prestige, curated luxury, and the absolute power of brand identity. But as her heels clicked against the tarmac, the atmosphere felt strangely thin. There were no flashes from pre-arranged photographers, no local dignitaries offering bouquets of jasmine, and most notably, no specialized security detail from the host nation waiting to whisk her into the city. According to those familiar with the itinerary, the arrival was meant to be a masterpiece of invisible influence. The plan was simple: land quietly, bypass the standard queues through elite channels, and emerge into the city as an honored, albeit private, guest of the highest circles. But Dubai is a place where the walls have ears and the bureaucracy operates with the precision of a Swiss timepiece. The routine pause at the immigration desk was the first sign that the script had been rewritten. What followed was not a public scene, for that is not the way of the Emirates. Instead, it was a display of what experts call sovereign indifference. Meghan was reportedly escorted politely, firmly, and without a hint of ceremony to a private holding room. This was not the gold-leafed VIP majlis she might have expected. It was a functional, quiet, and clinical space. For 60 minutes, then 90, then 2 hours, the silence stretched. In the world of high-status travel, time is the ultimate currency, and for every minute she sat in that room, her perceived power was devaluing in real time. The review of her credentials was handled with a terrifying level of detachment. In the United Arab Emirates, immigration officials possess wide, nearly absolute discretion. Entry is not a right. It is a privilege granted by the state, and that privilege can be revoked without a single word of public justification. When the door finally opened, the message delivered was short. There would be no luxury suite at the Burj Al Arab. There would be no keynote speeches or private dinners with the ruling elite. The decision was final: entry denied. It was in this moment of crisis that the most revealing part of the story unfolded. According to internal reports that later leaked through diplomatic whispers, the reaction was not one of quiet acceptance. There was an alleged outburst, a flash of the high-octane temperament that had been rumored for years within the halls of the British palace. But more significant than the anger was the strategy she employed to fix the situation. Rather than turning to the American diplomatic mission, the standard and logical move for a United States citizen, she reportedly reached for a bridge she had spent 5 years burning. She sought to leverage her British royal connections. She tried to invoke the very institution she had publicly criticized on global television, attempting to use the weight of the crown to bypass the laws of a sovereign nation. It was a move that critics argue was both desperate and deeply symbolic. It revealed a fundamental truth. Despite all the branding and the claims of independent success, when the doors of the world truly close, she still believed the Duchess title was the only key that would turn the lock. But Dubai is not impressed by titles that lack the backing of their source. The officials in that room knew something she apparently did not: that a title without the support of the reigning monarch is merely a ghost of a former life. By attempting to pull the British royal family into a private immigration dispute, she inadvertently shifted the entire narrative. It was no longer just a travel hiccup. It was an international incident that forced a choice. The silence from the Dubai authorities during this back and forth was their loudest statement. They did not argue. They did not negotiate. They simply waited for the next available flight out of the country. Within 4 hours of her landing, the woman who had arrived as a global icon was placed on a return flight, leaving the city as quietly as a shadow. The fallout of this moment cannot be overstated. For the rest of the world, the question wasn't just about why she was turned away, but why she thought she could still command the power of the throne after walking away from its duties. This was the moment the world watched her attempt to use a royal bypass and saw the gate remain firmly shut. The psychological impact of this rejection was profound. It signaled to every other global hub, from Riyadh to Singapore, that the Sussex brand no longer carried the diplomatic immunity it once claimed. As the plane climbed into the night sky, leaving the glittering lights of the Burj Khalifa behind, the era of ambiguity was over. The incident at the border had stripped away the facade. It proved that in the hard-nosed world of international relations, you are either a working representative of a state, or you are a private citizen subject to the same rules as everyone else. There is no middle ground. And as news of the snub began to filter back to London, the stage was set for the most brutal response of all, not from the Desert Kingdom, but from the very family she had tried to use as her ultimate trump card. In the next section, we will witness the moment the palace decided to stop the bleeding and cut the ties once and for all. The news of the Dubai rejection hit the global media cycle like a seismic wave, but the most critical reaction was not found in the headlines of the tabloids. It was brewing within the ancient, limestone walls of Buckingham Palace. For years, the British monarchy had practiced a policy of strategic silence, a stoic refusal to engage in the back-and-forth drama of the Montecito expatriates. But the incident at the Dubai border had changed the nature of the game. By allegedly attempting to invoke royal authority to bypass a sovereign nation's immigration laws, the situation had shifted from a family squabble into a potential constitutional crisis. Within a mere 24 hours of the jet's departure from the Emirates, the silence from London was broken, and it was broken with the precision of a guillotine. There were no leaks, no sources close to the king, and no ambiguous briefings to the press. Instead, there was a short, clinical statement issued through the office of Prince William. In the world of royal communications, brevity is the ultimate weapon. The tone was not one of anger or betrayal. It was the cold, detached language of an institution protecting its own survival. The message was unmistakable. Meghan Markle does not speak for the British crown. Not now, not in any situation, and certainly not under any circumstances involving international diplomacy. According to royal analysts, this was the moment the gray area that had existed since the year 2020 was finally bleached white. For 6 years, there had been a lingering ambiguity. Despite stepping back from official duties, the Sussexes had continued to inhabit a strange, middle-ground reality. They used their titles on commercial book covers, sat for high-profile interviews that blurred the lines between private grievances and institutional critiques, and traveled the world on what many called quasi-royal tours. This ambiguity was their greatest asset. It allowed them to maintain the prestige of the monarchy without the burden of its restrictions. But with this single statement, the palace withdrew the permission that had allowed that ambiguity to flourish. The statement clarified that being the mother of royal children or holding the title of duchess did not translate into a single ounce of diplomatic weight. It was a public stripping of authority. If help was needed at a foreign border, the responsibility rested squarely with standard United States consular services. Nothing more, nothing less. By directing her to American officials, the palace was effectively saying, "You are no longer our concern." Behind the scenes, the architecture of this response was reportedly overseen by Princess Anne. Known within the family as the Princess Royal and the ultimate enforcer of constitutional boundaries, Anne has long been the most vocal advocate for a clean break policy. Insiders suggest she was the one who insisted that the response be administrative rather than emotional. She understood that if the palace did not act, every foreign government from the Middle East to Asia would remain confused about who truly carried the mandate of the king. The move was described by commentators not as an act of retaliation, but as an act of containment. A monarchy survives on clarity. It requires clear roles, clear rules, and, most importantly, clear limits. When those lines are blurred, the institution risks being pulled into private commercial ventures or personal political crusades. By stating what she was not, the palace protected what the crown must remain: neutral, apolitical, and separate from private enterprise. This was a devastating blow to the Sussex brand. The power of a title is entirely dependent on the recognition of the state that granted it. If the state publicly disavows your use of that title in a functional capacity, the title becomes a hollow shell. It is a costume rather than a credential. In the high-stakes world of global power, a title that is mocked by its own source is worse than no title at all. What made this moment truly historic was the finality of it. For years, the public narrative had been fueled by the possibility of reconciliation or a third way for the couple to serve the monarchy from abroad. This statement ended that conversation permanently. It was the closing of a door that had been left slightly ajar for over 5 years. The palace did not need to scream to be heard. In royal language, the shorter the sentence, the louder the echo. The strategy was simple: clarify the rules, close the file, and move on. While the world debated the humiliation of the moment, the palace returned to its schedule of state dinners and charitable engagements, as if the incident had never occurred. They had effectively erased the connection in the eyes of international law. This move also sent a chilling message to any commercial partners or foreign leaders who might have been tempted to offer the couple special treatment based on their royal ties. The protective umbrella of the House of Windsor had been folded and put away. For the first time since she walked down the aisle at St. George's Chapel, Meghan Markle was truly on her own. As we analyze this royal strike, we must look at the timing. Why now? Why did the palace choose a moment of public vulnerability in Dubai to deliver the killing blow? The answer lies in the concept of reputational contagion. The monarchy could not afford to be associated with a figure who was being turned away at borders like an unwanted guest. By distancing themselves immediately, they ensured that the Dubai snub stayed attached to the individual, not the institution. In the next part of our investigation, we will look at how this loss of institutional backing began to trigger a total collapse of the brand. We will examine the frantic meetings with talent agents, the cooling of major Hollywood partnerships, and the quiet withdrawal of friends who suddenly found that their association with the Duchess was no longer a golden ticket, but a liability. The Dubai moment was not just a travel disaster. It was the first domino in a chain reaction that would redefine the meaning of fame in the 21st century. For many, the question was no longer about what she would do next, but about how much of the original dream was left to save. The aftermath of the Dubai snub and the subsequent royal disavowal did not just linger in the world of tabloid gossip. It migrated rapidly into the one place where sentiment is measured in cold, hard numbers: the global marketplace. In the world of high-level branding, prestige is a fragile currency. It takes 10 years to build and only 10 seconds to destroy. For Meghan Markle, the Dubai moment was not an isolated travel mishap. It was a loud, unmistakable signal to every boardroom in London, New York, and Paris that the Sussex brand had transitioned from a high-value asset into a high-risk liability. To understand the scale of this collapse, one must understand the psychology of luxury. Brands like the ones Meghan had courted major fashion houses, elite jewelry designers, and global tech platforms do not buy into celebrities. They buy into stability. When a brand signs a deal worth $10 million or $20 million, they are purchasing a piece of that person's perceived reality. For a long time, Meghan's reality was one of royal adjacent power. She offered the allure of the palace with the accessibility of California. But when the gates of Dubai remained shut and the palace issued its final, chilling statement of distance, that perceived reality evaporated. The product she was selling, access and institutional weight, was no longer hers to provide. Market analysts began to speak of brand entropy. This is the process where a public image begins to lose its energy and structure until it becomes white noise. For 2 years leading up to the year 2026, there had already been cracks. Major partnerships that were once announced with the fanfare of 100 trumpets began to cool. Projects that were supposed to dominate the cultural conversation either stalled in production or were quietly refocused by the platforms involved. But the Dubai incident accelerated this decay by 1,000%. It provided the ultimate due diligence answer for any company on the fence. If a sovereign nation and the British monarchy have both publicly withdrawn their support, why should a private corporation take the gamble? Then came the regulatory shadow. This is perhaps the most overlooked aspect of the brand's decline. According to public records and investigative reports from both the United States and the United Kingdom, the charitable structures linked to her name began to attract the kind of attention no public figure welcomes. In the world of elite philanthropy, clarity is everything. But reporters began to highlight inconsistencies in filings, questions about administrative costs, and the mysterious turnover of high-level staff. While no criminal accusations were made, the mere presence of regulatory questions acts like a poison in the well of high society partnerships. For an institution that prizes order, an unclear balance sheet is a red flag that no amount of star power can overcome. At the same time, the staff narrative returned with a vengeance. For years, there had been whispers and official complaints regarding the management style within her orbit. In the early days, these were dismissed by supporters as clashes of culture or institutional bias. But as the brand began to weaken, more individuals felt empowered to speak. New reports surfaced, some allegedly backed by documented evidence, describing an environment of high-pressure instability. In the modern era of corporate social responsibility, no major brand wants to be associated with a leader who has a public track record of employee turnover. The Duchess of Difficult moniker, once a headline, was now becoming a professional dossier that made hiring and partnership impossible. The social fallout was equally brutal. In the elite circles of Montecito and Hollywood, loyalty is often as shallow as a film set. When the power of the royal connection was active, the guest lists were endless. But as the Dubai snub became the definitive story of 2026, the invitations to the A-list inner sanctum began to dry up. It is a phenomenon known as reputational contagion. If being seen with someone might complicate your own relationship with the British Crown or your business interests in the Middle East, you simply stop making the call. Sources claim that high-profile neighbors and former best friends began to prioritize their own brand safety over their personal associations. The silence was not just at the airport in Dubai, it was in the dining rooms of Beverly Hills. This led to what economists call a liquidity crisis of fame. Meghan Markle was still famous, perhaps more famous than ever, NHUT. She could no longer liquidate that fame into profit or influence. She had reached a point of fame saturation without institutional backing. Without the palace to provide the why, the who became irrelevant to major stakeholders. If she wasn't a working royal, and she wasn't a successful producer, and she wasn't a diplomatic envoy, then what was she? The inability to answer that question meant that her value in the market began to plummet. By the middle of the year, the Sussex slump was a recognized term in media boardrooms. Talent agents who had once fought to represent her were now reportedly discussing how to pivot or de-escalate their involvement. The tragedy of the brand was that it had been built on the idea of being too big to fail. But the world of elite power is a closed-loop system. When you are expelled from the loop, the system does not just ignore you, it erases the pathways that lead back to you. The financial implications were the final blow. Maintaining a lifestyle that requires 24-hour security, private aviation, and palatial real estate requires a constant, massive influx of capital. When the $30 million deals are replaced by $0 inquiries, the math simply stops working. Rumors of frantic meetings with financial advisors began to leak. The image of the powerful global independent woman was being squeezed by the reality of high overhead irrelevance. In the eyes of the public, the Dubai moment was a humiliation. In the eyes of the industry, it was a sell signal. It was the day the world realized that the Sussex brand was not a sovereign power, but a private citizen with an expensive title and a dwindling list of options. The era of brand, Meghan had moved from the growth phase to the legacy phase, and the legacy was being written by the people she had tried to leave behind. In the next section, we will move inside the home of the Sussexes to see how this external collapse began to tear at the very fabric of the marriage that had started it all. If the world was saying no, what were Harry and Meghan saying to each other? As the external world closed its gates, the most intense scrutiny shifted from the glittering skylines of the Middle East to the quiet, gated confines of a mansion in California. For years, the marriage of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle had been presented as the ultimate fortress, an unbreakable, us against the world partnership that could withstand any storm. They were the couple that held hands in the face of tradition and stood shoulder to shoulder against the weight of a 1,000-year-old institution. But the year 2026 brought a different kind of weather. The Dubai snub did more than just damage a brand. It acted as a chemical reagent, exposing the deep, structural fractures in a relationship that was increasingly defined by two very different visions of the future. According to those within their inner circle, the tension was not born from a single argument or a sudden betrayal, but from a slow, grinding divergence of spirit. Prince Harry, insiders say, began to manifest a profound emotional fatigue. After 6 years of constant combat with the press, his family, and the very concept of his own identity, the Duke appeared to be a man whose tank was running on empty. He had walked away from royal life in search of peace, but he had found himself in a different kind of war, one of constant reinvention, relentless content production, and a never-ending need to justify his existence in the commercial world. To many observers, Harry's response to the Dubai disaster was one of calculated detachment. Reports began to surface that he was not closely involved in the planning of the Middle Eastern trip, a detail that sent shockwaves through the media. For a couple that once prided themselves on being two halves of a whole, this lack of coordination was a massive red flag. His silence in the aftermath was even more telling. There were no joint statements of defiance, no leaked photos of a unified front. Instead, there was a sense of emotional space. Analysts suggest that Harry is a man who now craves the very thing Meghan is most afraid of: invisibility. He reportedly dreams of a simpler existence, perhaps a return to the quiet service of the military world, or a life of true privacy away from the digital cameras. Meghan, on the other hand, remains a creature of momentum. In her worldview, to stop is to disappear, and to disappear is to fail. While Harry looked at the Dubai rejection as a sign to retreat and regroup, Meghan allegedly viewed it as a reason to push harder, to find the next platform, and to secure the next global audience. This contrast in survival instincts has created what psychologists call a vision collision. One partner wants to hide from the storm, the other wants to build a taller lightning rod. The financial pressure has only added fuel to this private fire. In the early days of their departure in 2020, the couple's earning potential seemed limitless. But by 2026, the Sussex premium had evaporated. The cost of maintaining a lifestyle that mirrors the luxury of a king, complete with 24-hour specialized security, private travel, and a palatial estate, is staggering. When the $100 million deals of the past are replaced by the silence of the present, the domestic conversation changes. Money, or the impending lack of it, is a universal stressor. And even for a prince and a duchess, the math of high overhead irrelevance is terrifying. Sources claim that discussions regarding their long-term housing and revenue streams have become increasingly strained, moving from collaborative planning to individual anxiety. Perhaps the most painful fracture lies in their relationship to the British monarchy. When the palace issued its final statement after the Dubai incident, it affected the two of them in fundamentally different ways. For Meghan, it was a professional deplatforming, a rejection of her status as a global influencer. But for Harry, it was a public disavowal from his own bloodline. He remains a son, a brother, and a prince of the blood. Every time the palace draws a hard line against the Sussex brand, it severs a piece of Harry's history. Insiders suggest that Harry's grief over this lost connection has created a wall of silence within the home. He cannot defend the institution that has rejected his wife, but he can no longer ignore the fact that he misses the structure, the certainty, and the family he left behind. The Dubai moment forced Harry to confront a reality he had spent years avoiding, that the Duchess title was not a shield for his wife, but a target. And more importantly, he realized that he could no longer provide the protection she expected. In the early days, he was her champion, her bridge to a world of power. But in 2026, with the palace's doors locked and the global elite turning away, he found himself powerless to change the narrative. What we are witnessing is the unraveling of a shared purpose. When two people are bonded by a common enemy, they are strong. But when the enemy is no longer a system or a family, but a growing sense of public indifference, the bond begins to fray. The tragedy of the Sussex marriage in the year 2026 is not that they stopped loving each other, but that they stopped seeing the same horizon. One is looking back toward the green fields of England with a sense of regret, while the other is looking toward the digital future with a sense of desperation. As the pressure continues to mount, the question lingering in the background is no longer about their public image or their next Netflix project. It is about whether a marriage built on us against them can survive when them simply stops caring, and us no longer means the same thing. In the final section of our analysis, we will look at the ultimate verdict, the lessons the world learned from this disgrace, and what it truly means when the expired authority of a name is all that remains of a royal dream. To understand why the gates of the desert kingdom remain so firmly shut, one must look far beyond the headlines of a single immigration dispute. This was not merely a matter of a missing visa or a breach of protocol. It was a manifestation of one of the most enduring and secretive power structures in the modern world, the unbreakable bond between the House of Windsor and the ruling families of the United Arab Emirates. In the world of global politics, alliances are often transactional, shifting with the wind of elections and economic cycles. But in the world of kings and emirs, loyalty is measured in generations, and the Dubai moment was a final, public affirmation of a friendship that has survived for over 40 years. According to respected historians and experts on the region, such as Peter Hellier, who watched the growth of the Emirates for over 4 decades, the relationship between the British Crown and the leaders of Abu Dhabi and Dubai is not merely diplomatic, it is personal. It is a family-to-family connection built on a foundation of mutual respect, shared tradition, and a deep understanding of what it means to preserve a monarchy in a changing world. The architects of this bond were 2 towering figures of the 20th century, Queen Elizabeth II and the founding father of the United Arab Emirates, Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan Al Nahyan. Throughout her long reign, the Queen did not treat the Emirates as a mere political partner, but as a sister kingdom. She made 2 historic state visits to the region, the first in the year 1979 and the second in the year 2010, moments that are still etched into the collective memory of the Emirati elite. These were not symbolic gestures. They were powerful reinforcements of a blood-deep alliance. When the Queen passed away in September of 2022, the grief in the Emirates was palpable, not because a foreign leader had died, but because a matriarch of their extended global family was gone. King Charles III inherited more than just a throne. He inherited these carefully nurtured ties. For the leaders of Dubai and Abu Dhabi, Charles is not a stranger. He is a man they have known for 50 years. He is a fellow sovereign who understands the heavy burden of continuity. When Meghan Markle landed in Dubai in the year 2026, she was walking into a space that values institutional legitimacy above all else. In the eyes of the Emirati leadership, there is a clear and absolute hierarchy. There is the crown, and there is everyone else. By attempting to use her title to gain special treatment while being publicly distanced from the British king, Meghan committed the ultimate sin in the world of monarchical diplomacy. She asked the leaders of Dubai to choose between a private individual with a famous name and the sovereign of the United Kingdom. For a culture that prizes loyalty and order, the choice was not just easy, it was inevitable. Dubai did not snub Meghan Markle because they disliked her personally. They snubbed her because to admit her under the guise of royal authority would have been an insult to King Charles. In the Middle East, prestige is not about how many people follow you on a social media platform. It is about who stands behind you when you enter a room. When the palace issued its statement clarifying that Meghan does not speak for the crown, it provided the Emirati authorities with the sovereign cover they needed to say no. The Dubai moment was, in reality, a synchronized display of global monarchical solidarity. It sent a message to the world. You cannot walk away from the institution and still expect the red carpet treatment from the institution's allies. Peter Hellier's reflections on this relationship highlight why it is so resilient. While Western governments change every 4 or 8 years, the royal connections remain steady. This personal trust allows both nations to weather political storms and maintain respect, even when policies differ. For Meghan, who had built her post-royal identity on the idea of being a global citizen and an independent power player, this was a harsh reality check. She discovered that in the ancient and powerful corridors of the Gulf, a duchess without the king is simply a private citizen. The irony of the situation is that the very modernity Meghan represented was what made her so unappealing to a city like Dubai. Dubai is a city that looks like the future, with its gleaming skyscrapers and artificial islands, but its heart is rooted in traditional structures of authority. It values predictability, discretion, and the sanctity of the family unit. The public nature of the Sussexes' grievances, the constant media noise, and the perceived lack of respect for the hierarchy were all factors that made her a high-risk guest. In the end, the power alliance proved to be a wall that no amount of celebrity could scale. The snub was a quiet nod from one royal house to another, a way of saying, "We hear you, and we stand with you." It was a reminder that, in the high-stakes game of international influence, the king's word still carries more weight than any Hollywood brand. As the world watched the fallout, the lesson became clear. Influence is a loan, not a gift. And when the lender, the British Crown, demands the loan back, even the most glittering cities in the world will stop answering your calls. In our final section, we will look at the ultimate verdict of this disgraced moment and what it tells us about the future of fame in an era where authority has finally and officially expired. The story of the Dubai snub is not just about a rejected visa or a closed door. It is a masterclass in the cold, clinical mechanics of modern influence. At its heart, this episode provides a difficult lesson that many in the world of celebrity fail to grasp. Influence is not something you own. It is something you are granted, something you are allowed to borrow, and, as we saw in the early days of February in the year 2026, it is something that can be revoked in a single afternoon. For nearly 6 years, the global public watched a grand experiment in post-royal power. The assumption was that a title, once bestowed by a 1,000-year-old institution, could be detached from its responsibilities and used as a personal brand asset. The idea was that the Sussex name was too big to fail, a force that could command the attention of world leaders and the gates of sovereign nations, regardless of official status. But the silence in Dubai and the short, sharp statement from Buckingham Palace shattered that illusion. Together, they delivered a final verdict. Symbolic power only survives for as long as the institution that created it chooses to recognize it. What we witnessed was the recalculation of value. One media strategist summed up the moment with brutal honesty. She thought leaving the palace would make the world chase her, but instead, the world simply watched and recalculated. The world realized that a duchess without the backing of the king is just a private citizen with a very expensive history. In the high-stakes corridors of global diplomacy and elite business, uncertainty is the ultimate poison. When a public figure appears inconsistent, neither fully inside nor fully outside an institution, they become a gamble that most organizations are no longer willing to take. The irony of this Dubai moment is hard to escape. What was intended to be a low-key, strategic entry into a new market of luxury and influence became a high-volume discussion on the limits of fame. It proved that while you can buy attention, you cannot buy authority. Authority requires the one thing the Sussexes walked away from: continuity. It requires being part of something larger than yourself. As we look toward the future, the question is no longer about brand Meghan or the next commercial deal. The question is whether any individual can truly survive at the highest levels of global power once they have been publicly disavowed by the very source of their prestige. For Harry and Meghan, the year 2026 marked the end of the gray area. The file has been closed, the rules have been clarified, and the world has moved on. Perhaps the greatest lesson of all is that prestige without predictability rarely survives the harsh light of reality. In a world that thrives on order and legacy, the attempt to rewrite the rules of royal power has reached its final chapter. The Dubai moment was not just a snub, it was the sound of a door locking from the inside, and as the echo of that closure fades across continents, we are left to wonder. When the authority expires and the cameras eventually stop flashing, what is left of the dream? Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the moment the world said no. If you found this analysis compelling, don't forget to like and subscribe for more investigative insights. We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Was this the final curtain, or is there